I fall behind. The second hand unwinds. If you're lost, you can look and you will find me. Time after time. If you fall, I will catch you, I'll be waiting. Time after time. Darkness has turned to gray. Watching through windows, you're wondering if I'm okay. Secrets stolen from deep inside. The drum beats out of time. If you're lost, you can look and you will find me. If you fall, I will catch you, I'll be waiting. Time after time.
Connect to those who are in the same place at the time that you're in that place. It's worthwhile to talk to the people who are there for 10 years.
You said
something you learn
go
in
slow.
that place. It's those people with
I
their
fall
experience where you can
behind.
benefit the most from. And it's those people
The second hand
Benny and I
unwind.
developed a friendship, and it wasn't uncommon.
If you're lost, you can look and you will find me. Time after time. If you fall, I will catch you, I'll be waiting. Time after time. If you're lost, you can look and you will find me. Time after time. If you fall, I will catch you, I will be waiting. Time after time. Time after time. Time after time. Time after
What happened when I
time.
did is that this evolution emerged, and suddenly I found a purpose, a message.
Tiny Dancer is a song that reached generations of music fans and reached new heights of popularity when it was featured in Cameron Crowe's film Almost Famous in 2000. Over the years, the iconic song has been covered by major artists like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Ben Folds, Tim McGraw, and Florence and the Machine. Hear the rest of the story when Rocket Man hits theaters tomorrow.
It's on our YouTube channel. We got several thousand views and a lot of very, very positive feedback. And Beny and I were talking, and if there's one thing we learned in recovery is that the world's an ocean, and we're a little twig on it, just riding, taking you somewhere, just go. And there seems to be a very powerful message communicating to Beny that he shared his story.
You got a fast car, I want a ticket to anywhere. Maybe we can make a
Two
deal.
sons, one who's 30.
Maybe together we can get somewhere. Any place is
His
better.
own journey has been
Starting from zero, got nothing to lose, and maybe we'll make something. And me, myself, I got nothing to prove.
Hear some of that from Beny, his own story and parenting, and hopefully this evening, at the very least, the goal is that you should feel more comfortable.
You got a fast car, I got a plan to get us out of here and working at the convenience store. Manage to save just a little bit of money, you won't have to drive too far. Just cross the border and into the city. You and I can both get jobs, finally see what it means to be living.
See, my old man's got a problem. Live with a bottle, that's the way it is. He says his body's too old for working. His body's too young to look like his. My mom went off and left him. She wanted more from life than he could give. I said somebody's got to take care of him. So I quit school and that's what I did.
I wonder if there's another topic that is tainted with so much fear, so much shame.
You got a fast car, is it fast enough that we could fly away? We gotta make a decision, leave tonight or live and die this way.
And I get it. I get it. I mean, I struggled with pornography for 24 years before I realized I had a problem.
So I remember we were driving driving in your car. Speed so fast, felt like I was drunk. City lights lay out before us, and your arm felt nice wrapped around my shoulder. And I had a feeling that I belonged. And I had a feeling I could be someone, be someone, be someone.
Until finally I had lost so much and suffered so deeply that it became unavoidable.
You got a fast car. We go cruising, entertain ourselves, still ain't got a job. I work at the market as a checkout girl. I know things will get better. You'll find work and I'll get promoted. We'll move out of the shelter, buy a bigger house and live in the suburbs.
I came to recovery because I realized that if I didn't stop, I was going to die for a long time.
So I remember we were driving in your car. Speed so fast, felt like I was drunk. City lights lay out before us, and your arm felt nice wrapped around my shoulder. And I had a feeling that I belonged. And I had a feeling I could be someone, be someone, be someone. You got a fast car, I got a job that pays all our bills. You stay out drinking late at the bar, see more of your friends than you do of your kids. I'd always hope for better, thought maybe together you and me fine. And I got no plans, I ain't going nowhere, so take your fast car and keep on driving.
My question to you is, how much do we have to suffer? How much do we have to lose?
So I remember we were driving in your car. Speed so fast, I felt like I was drunk. City lights lay out before us, and your arm felt nice wrapped around my shoulder. And I had a feeling that I belonged. And I had a feeling I could be someone, be someone, be someone.
And I believe as well that our children will look back on this generation.
You got a fast car. Is it fast enough so you can fly away? You gotta make a decision. Leave tonight, live and die this way.
Or for the devastating consequences that we allowed and enabled to happen because of our silence and our inaction. So, what is this porn age that I claim we're living in? Right? Pornography has been with us since the camera was invented, since a human being was able to capture information, put it on film.
What day is it? And in what month? This clock never seems so alive. I can't keep up, and I can't back down. I've been losing so much time. 'Cause it's you and me and all of the people with nothing to do, nothing to lose. And it's you and me and all of the people, and I don't know why I can't keep my eyes off of you.
To continue painting the picture, I actually want to tell you
what are the things that I want to say just aren't coming out right. I'm tripping on words, you've got my head spinning. I don't know where to go from here. 'Cause it's you and me and all of the people with nothing to do, nothing to prove. And it's you and me and all of the people, and I don't know why I can't keep my eyes off of you. There's something about you now that I can't quite figure out, and everything she does is beautiful, and everything she does is right.
Do the math, that's 3.3
'Cause it's you and me and all other people with nothing to do, nothing to lose, and it's you
read some
and
of the stats,
me
but there's so many.
and all other people, and I don't know why I can't keep my eyes off of you and me and all other people with nothing to do and nothing to prove, and it's you and me and all other people, and I don't know why I can't keep my eyes
If
off
you
of
started
you.
watching these videos in 1903, when the Wright brothers, took air for the first time, you'd still be watching them today, 150 years.
What day is
You
it?
can literally sit in front of your
And in what
life.
month this clock never seems so alive.
Just on this one site, 207,000 videos are watched every minute of every day. That's 10,000 hours a minute. Porn sites actually receive more visitors a year than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined.
I can't count the times I almost said what's on my mind, but
On
I
each one of these
didn't.
sites, there's a veritable alphabet soup of categories from A to Z. Multiple
Just
categories
the
per
other
letter.
day, I
Catering
wrote
to
down
every
all
single
the
fantasy,
things I'd
every single
say,
behavior,
but
sexual
I
act that you
couldn't.
could possibly imagine and beyond your
Just
imagination.
couldn't.
And they're all accessible to our children. Just one.
Baby, I know that you've been wondering.
Oh, who's watching so much porn? The United States is by far,
Oh, so here goes nothing.
more than
In case
about 3
you
times as
didn't
large
know,
as the next in line.
baby, I'm crazy about you. And I would be lying if I said that I could live this life without you, even though I don't tell you all the time. You had my heart a long, long time ago. In case you didn't know.
All right, 71% of the videos watched online are watched on our phones.
The way you look
How old are the
tonight,
people watching porn?
that second glass of
Ages
wine.
range from
that did it.
18 to 60 something and beyond. And of course, this website doesn't
There was
release
something about
information
that
about
kiss.
underage
Girl, didn't
viewers
mean
in
you.
trouble. But the biggest group by far are the 18 to 24-year-olds and 25 to 34-year-olds, accounting for a vast majority of the consumption. So regarding our kids, 18 to 30-year-olds are watching 63%, 63% of 18 to 30-year-olds are watching pornography several times a week. I mean, the stats are just crazy and crazy and crazy. Now, can we agree that we're living in the porn age, that this is the setting in which our kids are growing up? The next thing that I want to address, because there's so much confusion about this, is, some cynics among us may say, all right, so the vast majority of people are watching pornography, but is it addictive? Is it addictive? Is it a problem? Is it harmful, right? And the short answer is yes and no. So not everyone who watches porn becomes addicted to it, just like not everyone who drinks alcohol becomes an alcoholic, or not everyone who tries a drug becomes a drug addict, right? But pornography has a tremendous addictive potential within the right circumstances. So let me try and simplify how pornography actually can become addictive. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're watching or browsing through Facebook or Instagram, and minutes and hours go by and you're still just kind of going through the feed, right? And how does it feel when actually you start getting likes on something that you posted? It feels good, right? That's because a chemical called dopamine is released by the reward center in your brain when these things happen in the app. Now, let's add another layer to this example and imagine that after a couple of minutes in Facebook or Twitter, you experience an orgasm. Wouldn't you want to come back for more? Right? So dopamine is the chemical, it's a pleasure hormone. It's a mechanism of our reward center that tells us as human beings to focus on things that are biologically good for our survival, right? So we have a chemical, we have a substance called pornography that enters our system through our eyes and causes us pleasure. And a chemical that tells us keep coming back. But there's another chemical released as well. It's called delta phos-B. And this chemical actually creates pathways in the brain. It literally wires the brain to remember this behavior that is causing you pleasure. So now we have two chemicals, one that causes pleasure and one that bookmarks the behavior so that we keep coming back to it. And if that wasn't enough, there's a third chemical that is released when we orgasm, and that is oxytocin. Oxytocin, right? And oxytocin is actually called or referred to as the love hormone or the bonding hormone, right? It's what we release when we cuddle. It's what we release when we give each other a good hug, when someone caresses our skin. When mothers breastfeed their babies, oxytocin is what we release. When our school crush, held our hand for the first time, oxytocin is what was released, right? So now we have three chemicals in the mix. One that causes pleasure, one that bookmarks the behavior for future reference so that we keep coming back. And then we have a third one where we're literally bonding with our phones and bonding with pornography as if it were a human being. We develop a relationship over time where pornography becomes essentially our sex slave. Always on, 24/7, whenever we want it, always ready for action. Do we want a blonde, a brunette, a redhead? No problem. Do we want one of each, the three of them together, in any position, in any setting that you can imagine? No problem. I don't have to engage with it. I don't have to fear rejection. I don't have to do anything. It's accessible all the time, right there, on demand. My first experience of this high was when I was 11 years old. That's the first time I watched pornography. And I remember it to this day. I still remember images from the movie. And after I watched it as a teenager, what I did was simply hide it. I was completely in shock. I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know who to talk about it. I was completely, in the dark. But it was bookmarked. I got the huge hit of dopamine, and it was bookmarked for future reference. What really unleashed the addictive potential of pornography for me, and what I've seen in conversations with other people in the rooms, was a problem, an existential problem for which that reward mechanism, that hijacked reward mechanism, became a solution for. So trauma, insecurity, low self-esteem, anxiety, social inadequacy, rejection, all of these things came into play, and pornography was the default solution for all of this. It was literally the medicine to numb and anesthetize and medicate the existential pain that I was feeling as a kid. At that time was when my parents' marriage was, breaking apart. And I didn't have the coping skills to deal with it. And so what happens is pornography came in just at the right time as a solution for that problem. And it stayed a solution for a long time until eventually it became poison. It started to kill me. But back then in in the 1980s, late 80s, when I discovered pornography, I didn't have access to it. It wasn't as easy as it is today. To have access to pornography, I needed to get a fake ID, go get a magazine, and there wasn't the availability and the accessibility that we have today. So from about age 12 to about age 15 or 16, my medicine of choice was masturbation. As soon as I discovered it, it became compulsive for me. It became the medicine that I would take every night to soothe my pain. Our kids today are not going through that. Our kids today are not starting their sexual exploration with masturbation using their imagination. They're going straight to one of these sites and accessing God knows what. When I was about 16, I actually started to be able to buy magazines, right? And once again, it became completely compulsive for me. I started accumulating them. I lived in Canada for most of the year, in Venezuela for a couple of months of the year. I had stashes of magazines in both places. And again, it was a secret that I kept and I didn't share with anyone. From about 17 to 22, that's when the internet came into play for me. And it was dial-up internet. So, those were the times when, pornography was not video, it was just images online. And I literally had to wait minutes sometimes for one image to download. Our kids don't have to go through that anymore. They can access fast streaming video on demand 24/7 on their phones. When things really, really got bad was when high-speed internet came along. And that just raised my addiction to a whole other level. That's where our kids are beginning today. So where my addiction kind of ended is where our kids are starting, as young as 8, 9, 10 years old. So what impact did it have on me that I can share with you? So when I was 15, I was actually sexually abused. And that was one of the biggest kind of triggers for me to keep diving into the addiction. Because when I was about that age, thank you. When I was about that age, I had a high desire to get sexual validation from girls. I chased it. I went after it all the time, and I had been abusing pornography and had been abusing masturbation at that time for a long time. So what ended up happening each and every time that these situations would present themselves is that between the trauma of the abuse and the rewiring of consuming pornography, each and every time I had a sexual encounter, I could not perform. I could not get an erection. And for the longest time, I thought I was alone in this, and I felt the deepest of shames. Because what does a boy do when he fantasizes about sex all the time, finally has a sexual experience or an opportunity for a sexual experience, and it doesn't fulfill his expectations, right? It doesn't match the template, the virtual reality that pornography gave him. The boy simply retreats to what is safe, retreats to what works, and dives deeper in pornography. And so this is what's largely happening to our boys and girls right now as well, is that we actually have a name for it now. It's called porn-induced erectile dysfunction. And again, linking back to delta phos-B, that chemical that actually wires your brain to remember what caused pleasure. It literally wires your brain and wires your body to react to the visual stimulation of pornography. But then you encounter, or I encounter, an actual, real sexual partner, and it can never live up to the expectation. It never looks like pornography. It never feels like pornography. Right? So what happens? It gets worse. In addition to that, the abuse of the substance and the dopamine that comes with it completely throws the body off balance. So what happens because of that is that our threshold for normal pleasure gets completely off. So things that used to cause us pleasure, like hanging out with our friends, playing sports, or any other thing in life, just regular activities, stop working for us. They stop giving us the pleasure that they used to give us. And we start suffering from depression, we start suffering from isolation, we start suffering from dissatisfaction with life in general. And the only place we know where we can get that feeling is pornography, so it becomes once again that refuge that we keep coming back to. When I was 22, I got married very, very young. And one of the things that pornography, how it affected my relationship, was that I kept chasing after what I was looking at in pornography, thinking that this was normal, thinking that what I was watching in pornography was what I should expect from my partner. And of course, I was completely wrong. This is once again something that is just very, very common nowadays with our boys and our girls, is that there's a completely distorted sexual template and a completely distorted expectation of what is normal and what should be the sexual relationship. And once again, once we're there, the refuge is going back to porn. On the flip side of that, can you imagine how horrible and how painful it was for my former wife, right? To have someone constantly chasing after sex, after the type of sex that I was looking at in porn, and getting angry when I didn't get it, and getting frustrated because I thought that if I got the sex that I was seeing in pornography, everything would be right, everything would be fixed. It's been researched, a recent study by Oklahoma University, I believe, that couples that watch pornography are 200% more likely to get a divorce. Still along the lines of the flip side of my behavior, what I realized is that the feeling of betrayal that our partners feel when they find out the extent of which, the extent of our abuse of pornography feels exactly like the betrayal of, sleeping around on them. There's no difference. In fact, the magnitude can even be greater because I didn't sleep around with, one or two partners. I slept around in my head with thousands of partners. So how does it feel for our girls, for our young women, for our women, to be in a situation where they might feel like we're always comparing them to what we're seeing in porn, that they can never live up to that expectation, right? All along those years, again, I was completely clueless that I had a problem. I was completely ignorant that, pornography was an addiction for me. Whenever I felt angry, pornography. Whenever I felt anxious, pornography. Whenever I felt lonely, pornography. So this became literally my magical pill to solve all the issues in my life. Until eventually, in 2013, when I entered recovery, I was about to cross a line for real that I told myself I would never, ever cross. And it was at that moment that I stopped and I said, you know what? I think I may have a problem here. And I opened up to my therapist at the time, and he said, yeah, Beny, you're a porn addict. Get yourself to a meeting, get yourself some help, and start going to those meetings every day. Now I look back at some of those events with completely different eyes. See, I look back, for example, at my sexual abuse, and it doesn't make me angry anymore. It doesn't make me feel sad or like a victim anymore. I'm actually grateful for it, because I think that without that trauma, I would have probably been very promiscuous, and I would probably be dead from an STD. And I look at all the shame that I felt, and I look at all the pain that I felt, and I look at everything that I did now through the lenses of recovery, and I feel grateful for it, because the biggest aha moment for me was, oh my God, I see where this came from. I see the distorted patterns of beliefs and behaviors that were causing me pain and existential pain that I sought to medicate. I see what wasn't working, and now I can do something different. Now I can leave something different for my kids. And so that began my journey to really practice what I was learning in recovery and apply it to my kids, right? So one of the things that, again, I consider myself very lucky, because I don't feel like I had an option to avoid it. You know, if I wanted to help my kids, I needed to open up about it, right? But the very first uncomfortable conversation that I had with my kids was shortly after getting divorced. I had to sit down with them and my former wife and, you know, explain to them that mom was in a same-sex relationship now. And I remember feeling extremely nervous. I was telling myself, you know, I'm going to completely mess these kids up. You know, this is going to be a trauma for them, and I'm going to completely mess them up. And what ended up happening, as it always does, as it did tonight with this speech, is everything always goes very differently than we plan. Everything always goes very differently than we expect. And it turned out that, you know, they just accepted it, very matter of fact, right? And the same thing happened when I started educating them around the biology of their bodies, right? When I started to lay the foundation for preventing the issue of pornography in their lives. So the first thing that worked for me with regards to my kids was to lay a very impartial foundation, free of any kind of moral or religious, moral or religious conflict within the explanation. So I was very open with them, and you know, this is what your body looks like, this is what your body does, this is how it works, this is what you can expect as you grow up, this is how the woman's body works, this is how the both of them come together. And you know, this is something, a very special gift that we have as human beings, and that is meant to be shared with someone that we love. It's not meant to be, you know, exploited without regard, right? And, you know, surprise, surprise, I didn't screw them up. But then the day started to come when I was actually going to speak about, you know, pornography a couple of months ago, and I told myself, you know what, I need to sit down with my oldest son. He's 13 now. He's about the same age I was when I started my journey through porn addiction. And there's a couple of things that I did that I think really, really helped me. The first thing that I did was I educated myself on how to have the conversation. And there's great resources out there that we can access really easily. One of them is called fightthenewdrug.org. The other one is called educateandempowerkids.org. And we'll send you all this information via email. They even have, you know, a guide that you can use in order to have these conversations with your children. And The other thing that prompted my conversation with him was the fact that I had protected his devices. I had protected their phone, his phone, right? And I think the expectation around, protecting their devices, first of all, it's a must. It's like the most basic thing that we can do to protect our kids from the dangers of pornography. Aside from awareness and education, the basic thing that we can do is definitely, turn on the parental controls in their devices and apply all the filters or download internet filters onto your computers as well. And I had an expectation that because I had done those things, my kid would be safe. And I realized that what I could expect from that action was simply the opportunity to step in time and have the conversation when I realized what it was that, his curious mind was watching. So it saved him from accessing the dangerous stuff, and it told me, hey, it's definitely time to have this conversation again, to follow up on what I've already started. And the conversation went a little something like this. The conversation went a little something like this. Hey, you know that I love you, and I'm not really quite sure how to have this conversation with you, but there's something that we need to talk about because it's a reality of the world that we're living in today. And I've already talked to you a little bit about pornography. I've already told you what pornography is, right? Do you remember? Yeah. Pornography, these are movies and pictures of people having sex, and you told me, this stuff is kind of, unrealistic. It doesn't give me a good reference to what I should expect from healthy sexual, relationships as I grow up, right? And I opened up a lot more about my own experience. So again, I consider myself lucky because I had the experience that I could open up about it. But what really, really helped me in the conversation was to be vulnerable, was to be honest, it was to let him know that I didn't necessarily have all the answers, but that I would love him no matter what. That no matter what he comes across, he could come to me and talk about it. Because one of the things that I realized did the most damage to me was the secrecy that I kept around the issue. It wasn't so much that I was sexually abused. It was that I didn't talk about it, that I didn't ask for help. It wasn't so much that I was shocked when I was 11 years old and I encountered pornography for the first time. It was that I didn't talk about it. I didn't ask questions. And so whatever I didn't discuss, I created a story in my own mind. And those stories that we create in our own minds tend to be self-defeating, right? Or it was for me when I was a kid. And so what I have found helpful for me in this journey with my children has been, one, to eradicate, the shame or the language that promotes shame. One of the things that I can do in order to do that is always use I statements when I speak. I am scared. I am worried. I love you. I want to protect you. I don't know exactly how, but I know that if we keep an open dialogue about this, we're going to figure it out together. I know that if you encounter this stuff and you talk to me about it, we're going to be able to figure this stuff out together. So vulnerability, I statements, eradicating the language of shame and the language of criticism. The foundation, of course, a foundation that is not based on right or wrong, reward and punishment, right? And of course, follow-up. I can't leave it at that. These are conversations that I know I'm going to have to continue moving forward as well. And I'm going to have them again with my youngest son when he comes to that age as well. Now, based on the stats regarding our children, one of the things that we know is only 3% of boys have not seen pornography, and 16% of girls have not seen pornography at that age. So one of the expectations that I encourage you to examine is, we all want to think that we can prevent it And I think we need to prepare ourselves for how to face it and how to manage it when it happens, because I don't think it's a matter of if, I think it's a matter of when. Even in my own case, with my own kids, with as much experience as I may have, my expectation now is he'll come across it eventually. And all I can do in that case is to support and guide him through it, and to follow up to make sure that we're communicating around the issue and that there are no secrets between us. All right? What I want to do now is open it up for questions and answers, and hope to be able to continue to provide any kind of tool or experience that may be able to help you. Who wants to? Anybody have a question? I know it's a difficult topic. I know it's something that we're ashamed of or afraid of. But I really, really encourage you to kind of take the risk, because I know that whatever question you're asking in your head, there's probably another person in the room who has the same question. All right.
Prohibition, I imagine it's not the answer. So what is normal? You said with alcohol, you can be an alcoholic or you can drink alcohol socially. In pornography, what is standard or in your experience, or what have you had in the literature about what is normal and not normal?
Normal in terms of how much we watch it?
What type, frequency, I don't know.
Okay. So the first part of your question, by the way, prohibition is definitely not the answer. It didn't work with alcohol. It doesn't work with drugs. It doesn't work with any substance that we try to prohibit. I think in the long run, what people like me who are, striving to help, and the more that us as parents stand up around this issue and start demanding change around this issue, the best we can hope for is regulation. Because the reality is, again, all of this is available without any kind of age gating or age check, right? And so it's on us as parents to guide them and protect them as we would with anything else, right? At least for now. No one's going to solve it for us. We have to own it for now. We have to be ready, and we have to be able to talk about it with them. As far as what is normal, I don't think I have an answer for that. The nature of pornography consumption is progressive, right? So what I found in my own experience and what I've heard from other people in the rooms reflected back at me that has been very much like my own experience is that, we start where we start and we end up in a completely different place. It's chronic and it's progressive, and it's very much like tobacco, in the sense that, when we were young and we tried one cigarette, it wasn't going to kill us. I wasn't going to overdose from one cigarette. I'm not going to die from watching porn once. But the effects of pornography, the tendency to isolate from it, the dissatisfaction with one's partner because they don't look like or behave like what we're watching in porn, the shame that we may feel because over time we progress through different types of pornography. The reward center reaches a level where whatever used to work for us doesn't necessarily continue to work for us. So we start seeking more extreme and more varied types of pornography in order to keep that up. So there is no normal in that sense. Everyone is wired differently. Everyone has different preferences. What I do encourage people to do is to watch out for the progression, to really kind of look at where they started and where they're at as honestly as they can, and to talk with someone who's been through it, like me or like other people, and to be willing to try something different. Because while the consequences that I suffered were extreme, I believe that everyone who's watching pornography is suffering some of these consequences on some level, right? So that would be my answer to you. All right? Thanks for for the question. Any other questions?
Is there any signs that we should look at? I mean, you said you were able to keep it as a secret for that long. But as parents, is there kind of like signs that we can catch and see, oh, this might be a sign that he's watching too much porn, or I don't know, like.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, absolutely. So, what I try to link it back to is, what are we watching porn for, right? So I think, your question links to, who might be particularly at risk for finding porn as a solution to something that is going on inside, right? And in my own experience, what I noticed was, if I'm unable to regulate my own feelings, if I suffer from anxiety, if I suffer from anger, from lashing out, if I suffer from inadequacies, insecurities, low self-esteem, these are things that can be an entryway for using the substance of pornography as a medicine, right? As far as behavioral signs, something that you can actually see in your home that makes you wonder, are they watching porn? Isolation. So spending a lot of time in the room or in the bathroom, for example, taking long showers or long X or Y and Z. That's something that I would look at. Depression, withdrawal, feelings of shame. These are things that I would look for. Great. Any other questions? I can't see anything.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
There's having a conversation about porn with your children. But then there's having a conversation about porn addiction, which isn't really about porn. But how do you talk to the kids about, your brother may have seen porn and not become a porn addict, and you may have a different journey. So how do you have the conversation about porn without making them feel like they're bound for life if they saw porn, and then deal with the addiction where, one hit can lead to.
So I think the conversation that I would have would be very much the same, in the sense that it would be an open conversation, a vulnerable conversation. I would explain and, in fact, one of the things that I think would be worthwhile for a lot of parents is to make the conversation something that they can explore together. So there's no reason why we can't go online to the adequate resources and explore the topic and research the topic together with our children. Look at the facts together with our children. What are the risks? What are the possible consequences over time? Yes, watching porn once doesn't mean you're going to become an addict, but watching porn once changes you, inevitably, because this is not my grandfather's Playboy magazine. This is pornography that is intentionally designed and created for the maximum shock, for the maximum hit of dopamine, right? And so I think the conversation I would have would be very much in the same way. Very open, very fact-minded, right? So this is what the information is telling us. And listen, I love you no matter what. I think that's the most important message, that our kids understand that this is not about right or wrong. This is not about good and evil. This is about what is constructive for me, what is creative for me, and what is self-destructive for me, right? And over time, pornography, the research shows, and my own experience and the experience of many people that I know, it's a destructive affair. It's not a creative affair. So I think the conversation would lean more towards, if you watch it once, let's talk about it. If you watch it more than once, let's talk about it. Let's just always keep a communication around it so we can, figure this out together. Does that help? Yeah. Yep.
Thanks a lot, Benny.
Hey.
I substituted high school, public high school, and like with me when I was in high school, porn was taboo. To them, they just share it among themselves. It's like normal. It's like, so if you have parents telling them, porn is not that good for you, and to us it was taboo. To them, like the pressure of their schoolmates is more powerful. Like that's normal. My
Yeah.
parents are just old fashioned. That's a tough dynamic there where it's just commonplace for them.
Yeah. So I think about 90% of the kids, about 13 to 20 something, believe that pornography is absolutely normal. Absolutely normal. So I think once again the key here is to jump in time as early as possible, not to wait until it happens, but to try and have the conversation before it happens, right? And the other conversation or the other dynamic that I try and work on with my kids is peer pressure, how to deal with peer pressure. I'm, again, very lucky because my kids are both very sure of themselves. They're very, I don't want to say immune, but they don't really care about peer pressure that much. But this, it really remains to be seen what kind of pull their friends are going to have when they start sharing porn, because the reality is that they pass it around like it's nobody's business. In fact, most of our kids find it a normal part of life to ask and request and get and send nude pictures, sexting, without knowing that this, in fact, is a crime, right? This is distribution of child pornography. Literally, if a boy asks a girl or vice versa for a sext or a nude picture, and then for whatever reason they send it to their friends because that's something that they do as well, that's a crime punishable by law. It's child pornography, right? And so yeah, it's a delicate subject. And again, the more we can practice openness with our kids, the more we can sit with our kids and say, when I was your age, this is what I struggled with. This is what peer pressure looked like for me, right? How often do we do that? How often do we sit with our kids and actually, open our hearts and say, hey, I don't have all the answers, but look out for this. Talk to me when this happens. Let's figure it out together. It doesn't seem to happen very often, but I think it really, really helps. I think it's helped my kids tremendously. Yeah.
You mentioned when you were answering that question about types of pornography, you mentioned Playboy. One good idea is to orient them on less aggressive or less, I don't know, is that something you've heard, or is that?
As an expert, as an expert consumer of pornography, I don't think that even exists anymore. When I was buying magazines at the time, the first magazines that I got, they displayed nude women, right? And it wasn't too long after that where that really wasn't cutting it for me. And I discovered that there were other magazines that were displaying actual people having sex. And so that became the high at that time. So when and I don't recommend you do, but if you're familiar with pornography as I am, there's just, I can't recall anything that isn't just super hardcore and just really, really, definitely not something I'd like my children to see. Definitely not something I'd like my children to see. And, there's growing trends actually that are very distorted. When researching, when reading about what's going on with porn, one of the categories, because this is like a menu, like you go to the Cheesecake Factory and this is what you want, right? This is what I want to order. So one of the categories that is growing consistently fast in the last couple of years is rape fantasy. All right? Another category that's growing over the last couple of years are things related to incest, pretend incest. So stepdaughter, stepdad, stepmother, stepsister. These are things that are truly, truly worrisome. So my objective with my own children is to educate them enough and to have them be sure of themselves enough so that they know that what's worthwhile for them is to simply be patient, to allow their sexuality to develop naturally, to meet that girl or meet that boy and fall in love and discover what sexuality looks like intuitively and safely, right? Because there isn't any kind of porn out there that really is less harmful or safer to watch that I've seen.
What's the percentage of people who are addicted? Because you mentioned a lot of statistics about consumption, but I don't know about addiction.
Addiction. It's a great question, and it's really, really hard to know. Really hard to know. So one number I can give you is the specific recovery fellowship, the recovery group that I go to, is an international, it's kind of like AA, right? So 12-step program specifically for, sexual addiction, right? And in working with them, I estimated that there's about 17,000 members worldwide. So those of us who are in recovery are just the tip of the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. When you consider the numbers of people that are watching porn, like, everyone, literally almost everyone is watching porn. And whether they're addicted or not, I don't know. They don't even know. It's such a taboo issue. It's so full of stigma that we do miracles not to look at it, not to face it, not to question it, right? So I don't know if there's a number for that, but I know the reality is a lot of our friends, acquaintances, a lot of the teachers in our schools, a lot of the lawyers and dentists, and just everywhere you look, chances are people are watching pornography, and what I entertain when I think that is, imagine the same number of people walking around high on heroin or high on cocaine or high. It's a different high, right? But with lasting effects, objectification is one of the severe consequences of pornography abuse, which, what it means is that we get desensitized to the reality that this is not just a collection of body parts exclusively there for my pleasure on demand. This is another person, right? And so we start looking at the world through these lenses where everyone we see is just a possible sexual object for us to entertain with, right? Yeah, great question. I wish, one of the, there's a great YouTube video called The Great Porn Experiment. And it was done by people trying to research the issue of pornography addiction. And one of the challenges that they had in studying the subject is that they couldn't find a control group. They couldn't find men and women, or specifically men in this case, I think, that hadn't watched porn in order to observe and evaluate the effects, right? So it's a super widespread behavior. I'm not going to call it addiction. Behavior. So a lot of people, as you saw, are engaging with it. How many people are addicted? I don't know. But I do know, I think I do have actually a stat that I can share with you. Let's see. All right, so 63% of 18 to 30-year-olds are viewing pornography at least at least several times a week. 63%. So if you find how many, how many people 18 to 24, right? 18 to 30. How many people there are in the country, and you do 63%, those are the amount of people that are watching several times a week. People that are watching several times a week may or may not be addicted, but they're certainly engaging with it on a regular basis, which is conducive to the progression over time. All right? Hey.
Hi. So, I was watching Game of Thrones maybe a year ago. So I was watching Game of Thrones, and we share accounts in the family, right? So my son messaged me. He was learning away from home, and he's like, "Mom, like seriously, that is not appropriate for you." So I was like, "Well, clearly, if you know it's not appropriate for me, you're watching it to know that it's not appropriate for me."
Right.
Which enabled me to have a conversation with him
Right.
about pornography and masturbation. My question is, similar to his question, is, you know, you could dabble in drinking every once in a while socially. You could dabble in smoking a joint once in a while. Is there a normal teenage behavior of pornography and masturbation? Like every time my son goes in the shower, am I supposed to have like a little mini heart attack?
Great question. So I'll address it in parts. Game of Thrones, by the way, I'm a fan. And I realize it's a great contradiction being a recovering porn addict, because it's a show that very clearly and just blatantly promotes objectification and promotes nudity and sexual behavior on screen just for the sake of it, just to titillate and so as a recovering porn addict, you know, I'm at a place where watching that doesn't trigger me anymore, right? I can watch it and I'm okay. It doesn't make me want to go to porn, right? But at the same time, I'm conflicted with it. I am conflicted with it because I realize it's not something that is, it's not a healthy message, right? It really perpetuates these things that are kind of stemming from pornography as well. It's kind of an expression of it, right? As far as normal behavior during the teenage years, that's a amazing question, because one of the tricky things about these conversations and about navigating pornography consumption during the teenage years is, what really is just natural curiosity of a boy or a girl that age within the times that we live in, and what, how much of it is it potentially addiction. And once again, it's about being able to have the conversation. It's not necessarily about what they're doing. It's about what they're doing and keeping secret. It's about what they're doing that may be causing them shame, that may be causing them feelings of self-loathing, right? Because those are the reasons why we would keep a secret. Why wouldn't we feel like we can talk about it openly with our parents? Because we feel ashamed, because we kind of don't like that we're doing it, we don't feel good about it, we're afraid we're gonna get in trouble. Some parents may become angry. That is key as well. If we discover that our children may be using porn, one of the keys is not to react, to take a breath, maybe take a couple of days to kind of process it, and to really develop a strategy around having a conversation that is coming from unconditional love and understanding and guidance and just concern for their protection, as opposed to a reaction that's going to perpetuate the feelings or expand on the feelings of shame and guilt and self-loathing, right? So no, you don't have to have a heart attack every time they go into the shower. But again, my view on how much pornography is okay for a kid to watch, my encouragement for my children and my encouragement for everyone that I talk to about how to possibly attack these conversations with them is, hey, what do you have to gain from pornography? If we know that it's going to cause you possibly over time an inability to connect intimately with another human being, if we know that over time it might even cost you the ability to perform sexually, if we know that over time when you get into a sexual experience, it's not going to live up to the expectations that pornography have created, right? What is it really that you have to gain by watching it? The encouragement for me and for my kids is, let's do our best to stay away from it, because there's really nothing to gain from it, in my view.
Any, just because there are people watching,
Yeah.
they can't hear the speakers. When you hear his question, just
Repeat this, okay, thank you.
So, there's a lot of talk about this You know, like I've heard a statistic that over 30% of men between the ages of 20, 30 are experiencing this PIED.
Yeah.
The age that boys are supposed to be the most
Yeah.
healthy, we're having like the highest dysfunction. But what about the subject of the industry and the ethics? Like you're saying, what amount is okay when it's known that so many of these people are sex trafficked, they're led into coercion, they're being used, you know, given drugs and things to put them in this industry. How can we say a little bit of that is okay? Explaining, I mean, we just explain so many other ethical topics to our kids that are how we view the world and how we want humans to be treated when this is an industry that is obviously violating and exploiting people.
Absolutely. So the question was around the link between pornography and sex trafficking. The experience on the other side of the screen, so to speak, of the people that are involved in the industry, right? And around the widespread erectile dysfunction that men, in theory, in their prime are experiencing. So again, in parts, yes, Viagra was invented when it first came out. All the commercials featured just older men, right? The idea was to give older men the ability to have sex again. And what we're finding now is that there's an explosion in prescriptions for Viagra and other ED medications for men under 40. And partially the reason for it is pornography abuse, 100%, right? As far as the other side of your question, I love that you brought that up because it's totally true. We often focus on the effects of pornography on those who consume it, and we think of pornography as a victimless activity. Oh, the other person, the person behind the camera, they're getting paid for it. They like what they're doing. They're enjoying it. And nothing could be further from the truth. One of the things that I did actually tell my son when I was discussing pornography with him was that one of the dangers is that a vast majority of the pornography that is out there actually promotes violence against women. It's either verbally or physically violent and degrading towards women, right? And these people are paid to make it look like they're enjoying it. And a lot of them are sex trafficked. And a lot of them endure harsh abuse over years when they're within the industry. Some of them even kill themselves because it's unbearable. So this is, you know, one of the biggest myths around porn and porn consumption is there's no victim, right? But the reality is that there is widespread victimization on the other side of the camera, and that when we're creating demand by consuming pornography, we are enabling the sex trafficking industry, we are enabling the abuse of women, and we have to own that. We have to own that. We have to look at it if we're going to be completely, if we're going to look at the full picture. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So, I touched on this question already, what age is appropriate? Because sometimes like you think like, you know, maybe the kid's not ready for it, every kid has a different type of, you know, way of looking at things. So at what age do you think is important to bring it up to your child? And also about talking about healthy relationships, is that a separate conversation from pornography? Or that's like sort of, you bring it up at the same time, in the sense of like, okay, there's healthy and then there's unhealthy, this is the unhealthy part and this is the healthy part.
Right. So the question is around, you know, what age is it appropriate to start having the conversation about pornography and about healthy sexuality, and should we have these conversations together or separately? So I think it varies. I think as parents we have to judge and we have to kind of know how mature our kids are without making the mistake of assuming that, oh no, it's not going to happen to them because they're too innocent or they're too young, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to happen to my son, or it's not going to happen to my daughter. They're too innocent. They're too naive. And the fact is, when we think back at our own experience as teenagers, we typically knew far more than our parents suspected. And it's the same with our kids. They know far more than we think they know. But in the end, I think the way I approached it was I started to lay down the foundation around just how sex works, how babies are made, fairly early on. Like, I think my children were about 8 or 9 years old when I started having these conversations with them, simply around the biology of how it works, right? And I had the first conversations around pornography with my children when they were 11 and a half and about 9 years old. I had the first conversation with them together because my younger one is very mature. And so it's different for each one of our kids, but I would definitely do it on the younger side. If we have these conversations in a prepared way, if we educate ourselves beforehand, there's really nothing to fear because they can handle these things. How are we supposed to guide them if we don't talk about it? Whatever we don't talk about it, we are leaving, if we don't educate our kids, we're leaving it to the pornographers to educate our kids. Sorry, Ellie. And as far as having the conversation together or apart, I think it could be useful either way. I think it's good to bring awareness around what we want them to avoid, what we want them to stay away from, but it's also great to let them know what it is that they can look forward to, right? So if what we don't just want them to, we don't want to tell them just don't do this. We want to tell them this is what you can look forward to if you simply let things happen naturally, right? Here's the thing. When I was young, and even, but from the beginning, when I was acting out with pornography, nothing around the experience revolved around the bodily sensations. I wasn't paying attention at how it felt to stimulate myself or to touch myself. It was all about using visual stimulation to trigger a fantasy in my head to prompt a response, right? And so that created tremendous challenges for me, and these are common challenges to people that are abusing pornography today, is that the actual, sexual encounter, the feeling of skin, the feeling of two people coming together, it doesn't arouse, doesn't produce the sense of arousal because we've been abusing a circuitry that simply depends on visual stimulation. So in terms of healthy behaviors when they're young, one of the things that I tell my children is, you may come to a point where, your body biologically will just kind of ask you to experiment, right? To explore. And that's okay. But what I encourage them to do is, use your imagination, focus on the bodily sensations. Start there, enjoy it. If you have any questions, come to me, talk to me, right? If you feel weird about it, come to me, talk to me. If for some reason it's causing you feelings of shame, come to me, talk to me. But explaining the difference between, hey, sexuality is about contact, it's about connection, it's about interaction, it's about acceptance, it's about trust, it's about communication. All of these things come into play in sexuality versus visual stimulation triggering a fantasy and arriving at a response, right? Ellie?
So we spoke about, we both benefited from being in rooms of recovery, and we got into trouble. That's a place we went to. A few months ago in the meeting I go to, a kid walked in, and as is common with the newcomers, someone will ask, tell us about you. It wasn't clear how old he was, but as he spoke, he said that he's 17. And instantly he was asked to leave. And a discussion kind of ensued amongst the rest of the group. Was that the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do? And brought up and decided it was the right thing to do, but unfortunately, like unfortunate for that kid who was looking for help. I mean, he walked out, turned
Yep.
beet red and walked out, and I just wonder in your research or anything, if a kid is addicted to pornography, what's available to them?
Great. So great question. If a kid is addicted to pornography, what is available to them? Because it's true, the traditional recovery groups and 12-step meetings are for people that are 18 years or older. And so that certainly leaves a void in what's available to a young person who's struggling with pornography, because these recovery meetings for me, and we share this experience, have been tremendously helpful. Just the experience of walking into a room and, walking in full of shame, full of pain, full of confusion, not knowing what to do, completely devastated, completely beat up by the addiction, and then sitting down and hearing people talk about it and realizing, oh my God, I'm home. I'm home. Finally, people understand what I've been going through. That is just priceless. It's just priceless. And what we learn in those rooms that we can then take outside of those rooms is just exceptional. So for kids that are already struggling with addiction, the number one thing that I would recommend is, first of all, once again, as parents, look out for the reaction, the discovery, right? The reaction when we discover that our kids may be struggling with porn is crucial. We want to be calm. We want to be accepting. We want them to know that it doesn't matter if they stop or not, we're still going to be with them. We're still going to love them, right? We may be concerned about them. We may want them to stop, but we can recognize that we can't control their behavior, that we can't fix them, and we need to work on ourselves as parents to lovingly detach from their addiction or their behavior, so that when they're okay, we're okay, and when they're not okay, we're still okay. And so that there's no more added shame, no more added guilt, right? And then, of course, the very first thing that I would do is seek professional help. Find a therapist that has experience with pornography addiction, and start attending those sessions with a therapist together with the child, and the child alone with the therapist. Yeah. Sorry?
It's time to create spaces for that.
Yeah, it's tricky. So the comment is we have to create spaces to help and empower the addicts who are young, who are younger than 18 years of age, and it's really, really tricky in this country because there's a lot of liability issues. In a headspace where sexual addiction might equal sexual offense, right? And as part of the confusion around this whole issue, and as part of the stigma, is the misjudgment that if someone is a sexual addict, they're a sex offender, and that couldn't be further from the truth. But there are a lot of liability issues. Yeah, it's tricky. And so what would that space look like? Could it be a support group? And I know there are some kind of religiously based support groups where they are supervised. They might be run by a therapist or a psychologist. So the kids are, guided through the process of, or a process of recovery, because it won't be the same necessarily as a 12-step program, but through a process of recovery with the guidance of a certified counselor, right? But yeah, we definitely need a lot more spaces. Yeah. Sure. Two more questions. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm not sure how I'm formulating the question, but you mentioned, I believe you have both your children are males, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And also in the question of the porn industry, our mind right away goes to the female as the victim. The trafficking, the first thing you picture in your mind is a girl, not a boy.
Mm-hmm.
How do we have the conversation and allow the child to know, or whatever age, that the male victim on both sides of the screen, it's not a question of being bad, it's a question sometimes of being a victim of, and I don't mean of a sexual abuse, I mean of the actual act of, for sexual needs turning to porn, or what's about the porn male actor. allowing the boy to understand that it's not the girl's the victim, the boy is evil, but rather the boy is a victim in his own way, both as an actor and also as a recipient.
So, tricky question, because when I read about when I've read about the porn industry, it is certainly largely a male-dominated industry, where it is, it is the males who are kind of dictating how this pornography is produced, what kind of sex acts are going to be presented on film, and all of that comes from really good R&D online about what people are searching for, right? So every fantasy and every behavior that everyone is searching for online is getting logged somewhere, and porn producers target that and cater to those emerging needs, right? Yeah, the actors. So as far as the actors are concerned, some of them are producers as well. So I don't think I know enough about the male side of the porn actors, whether they're victims or not in their own way, to be able to address that properly. I don't think I have enough information to answer that.
Well, my question is that part of the issue that drives the male with porn and sex is society has accepted that the man is el conquistador if he's doing it. And they're ashamed, I literally know people that if their son is doing porn, all right, the daughter. Oh.
So the double standard? Yeah, absolutely. So I come from a Latin American country, as some of the people in the audience do too. So the macho thing is certainly something that has been part of my experience, and definitely used as a justification and rationalization for the behavior. And then, of course, on the flip side of that, we demand from women these things, and then we call them all sorts of names for giving it to us, right? And it's completely insane, absolutely. And so how to address that? By taking responsibility, by having the conversations, in this context or in other contexts, by educating our children. Yeah, absolutely. Women have sexual preferences and needs and do's and don'ts and wants and not wants just as men do. Women are gifted with a sexual body just as much as men are. And they are entitled to enjoy their sexuality just as men are in the way that they choose to. Where we get into trouble is, again, when as men, within this context of the double standard, we start expecting that what we see in porn is what real women in our lives should give us. Because the reality is, it's just not realistic. It's just not realistic. And one of the problems that our young women are facing is that the normalization of porn has been, is so normalized that to them, some of these really risky behaviors and fantasies and desires are kind of normal within their experience, right? They kind of feel they're expected to give it. So in this whole equation of how to, linking back to your question about, demand and the victimization on the other side, in this whole equation of creating change within our consumption of pornography, I actually think that our girls, our young women, and our women in general really hold a lot of the power to create change in this. They really do. Because if we can teach our young girls boundaries, if we can teach our young girls that it's okay to say no, that none of what's being demanded of them should be freely given unless, there's no reason to do it for pleasing others, to say no, to respect themselves and say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to give you what you're asking just because you saw it in pornography. If that's what you're looking for, go find someone else. It's a really, really good question, because I really do think that women hold a lot of the power in creating change. Mm-hmm. Last question?
If no one does, I have one more question.
Let's see.
Does anyone have a question? Question, how do you pass the message to your kids that religion talks about an absolute perfection, and without living up to it, you're not damned, perverted, or
Yeah.
how do you not mix the message?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually really, really glad that you brought it up.
Can you repeat the question?
So, within, how do I communicate to my kids within the right? How do I communicate with my kids around the issue of religion and the standards of perfection of right and wrong or black and white that are communicated within religion regarding sexuality? Does that about cover it? All right. So there's a lot to this. On the one hand, what I had to do as I started recovery is I really had to reframe what God was for me. Because I always had a lot of conflict with my religion. I'm Jewish, just like you. And, referring to God as He really brings images of, some kind of human, it just doesn't make sense to me, right? And then on the other hand, within that thought of reframing what God means to me, realizing, wait a minute, so I'm a creature of this higher power that I call God. I was created with this sexual biology, so were all women and men. And we were not created with it to feel ashamed of it. We were created with it to procreate, of course, biologically, but also as a gift to enjoy it within the right context, right? Not the right context, within a healthy context, within intimacy, within love, within connection, right? And so reframing some of the concepts within religion has really helped me. The concept of sin, for example, that if I do this, I will be punished. If I masturbate, I will be punished. Right? If I have sex outside of marriage, I will be punished. These are things that I had to reframe as well, because, again, biologically, why would God create beings that start sexually maturing at 13, 14, 12, 11, depending, why? And then we look within our own religion once again, and we see that a man in Judaism is someone who's 13 years old. And a woman in Judaism is 12 years old. And perhaps thousands of years ago, that is the age at which we married. Right? So biologically, it coincided, right? The commandments and the whole right and wrong and black or white that the book communicates coincided with our biological needs. But then we evolved as a society and we said, no, now we don't get married at that age, that's not acceptable. Now we don't have sex necessarily at that age, that's not acceptable. And now there's kind of a void in between what our sexual progress, where it starts, and where we say, okay, now you got married, now it's acceptable, right? And so the concept of sin is something that I really had to reframe, because I don't see it as, if I do this, I'm gonna be punished. I see sin as there's a spiritual force, there's a process of life that wants life to thrive, to grow. And I, as a human being, can forget that I'm a part of that reality because I have choice, right? So I can choose to do something that is completely misaligned with spiritual principles like honesty, like humility, like, serving others. But And sin, within that context, what it becomes for me is simply the feedback loop from the process of life telling me what I'm doing, the consequences of what I'm doing are not healthy for me. They're not constructive for me, right? It's not that I'm being punished for it, it's that whatever it is that I'm doing, whatever actions I'm taking, if they are aligned with the life force that wants life to thrive, I will experience consequences that are aligned with that. And if I'm misaligned, I will start struggling with these things. And so I think reframing what these concepts mean is really, really helpful, because black or white, right or wrong, is part of the reason why we're here. You know, if there's one conversation we haven't been able to really master over thousands of years, is how to talk to our kids about sex. And now how to talk to kids about porn. It's always been uncomfortable. It's always, you know, if we come from a religious background, it's always been tainted with morality and with right and wrong and shame and punishment, right? And that is one of the reasons why pornography has been able to spread as it has, because we don't really know, and we have never really known how to handle it. So, great question. I think the answer lies in taking a look at these concepts and reframing them, and having these conversations with our spiritual leaders, our rabbis, and our colleagues as well, and finding new ways, new perspectives to look at these words like sin, like right and wrong, right? So, one last thing, and then we'll wrap it up. Judaism is also very wise. You know, Hasidus is very wise as well. The idea of a relationship starting from an intimate connection, you know, getting to know each other, and then evolving into love and working together towards love and creating love in the long term, and then it becoming physically intimate. That is a very wise thing. You know, it is really the ideal, right? Because sexuality comes and goes, desire comes and goes. And we're used to starting our relationships, and this is something I learned from Alexandra, my girlfriend. You know, we're used to starting our relationships in bed, and then we're all hooked up on love chemicals, and we think it's going great, and then we start to get to know the person, and we realize, hey, wait a minute. So we've been trained to do things backwards. So there's something to the Hasidus approach, of course there is, but I think there's terminology that we have to reframe. All right, so to close up really, really quick, I want to leave you with 3 things that I've learned from recovery. One is, if there's something that you've gotten from this talk today, we have a saying in recovery that goes like this: we only keep what we have by giving it away. All right, so I invite you to be courageous. I invite you to be open and transparent. I invite you to have these conversations everywhere you can, because if there's something here that was helpful for you, you can't keep it a secret. I ask you not to keep it a secret. Secret is where this has thrived, and only transparency and vulnerability and openness is gonna help it. And then the other thing I want to leave you with is keep coming back. Another saying from recovery, just keep coming back, and the ways that you can do that is keep engaging with this type of content. You know, people publish a picture of what they're eating online and get all sorts of engagement and shares and likes and stuff. And important content like this, people are afraid to interact with it. So one way you can keep coming back and give away what you have is to engage with the content, share the content, look for the content, share articles about it, so that we can start having these conversations more openly, so that less people are going to be afraid to show up to a room like this and gain new perspective on what's going on. So with that, really thank you everybody for coming.
Bueno, pero es normal que tú
got me thinking.